I want to cover for just a minute some logical conclusions or a logical look at the numbers that we've been receiving about this coronavirus thing. Let me start off with talking about the numbers inside of China. If we go to the Worldometer website, which a lot of people have been using for the source of their numbers, and they have various sources, I'll get to those at the end, toward the end of this video. But if we go to their website, we see in the section that usually has a chart about the new cases in China outside of Hubei province. However, instead of a chart, today, this is their website as it appears right now on the 27th of February. It says, due to discrepancies in the data reported by Hubei province and China's National Health Center in the last 2 days, we are currently validating the February 22nd through February 21st, fourth data. We will publish the graph again as soon as the data is reconciled. Now, this little paragraph just reinforces a concern that I've had ever since these numbers started coming out of the National Health Center of China. How reliable are the numbers? If there's numbers that need to be reconciled, then that probably means it's kind of like a situation I've seen in a couple of days in the past, over the past month and a half or so, that we've been receiving numbers. I've noticed that on some days, the numbers of the parts that they're reporting don't always add up to the total that they report. In other words, the parts don't always equal the sum of the total, or however you want to say that. But that's the only numbers we have, especially when we're concerned with cases in China. Let's look at the overall numbers as they have been reported, and let's accept them and just look at the data we have in one aspect here real quick, or two aspects. We're going to look at active cases and closed cases. Now, in active cases, the report is 46,430 people currently have been confirmed with coronavirus and have an active case. 8,471, or 18% of those people, are a serious or critical condition. Now, in closed cases, 36,159 people have come to a conclusion in their episode. Of those 36,159, 2,814 died, or 8% of cases that have already been closed, 8% died. Now, if you take the active cases and the closed cases, add them together, you get the 81,000 plus cases that are being reported for today. So 8% death of the ones that have come to a conclusion, 18% active of those active cases are serious or critical condition. Let's move on to another aspect about these numbers. And we're going to talk about the number of tests that are being administered. If you remember, in the China numbers, the numbers were going along, progressing at a regularly, almost predictable linear rate. And all of a sudden, I think it was on the 11th of February, just thousands and thousands and thousands of more cases popped up because they changed the criteria for listing a case as being confirmed. Up until that point, they only listed the confirmed cases that had been tested for the COVID-19 virus as one of those cases and put it in the numbers. But then they decided on the 11th of February that all the cases where people had the symptoms and had a negative chest x-ray that indicated that there was something bad going on there, that those people would also be counted in as some of the number of cases of people that had coronavirus. So that's why there was that huge spike on the 11th of February. In other words, the criteria for determining who has it and who doesn't have it changed the numbers. Now, looking at that, you see here on this numbers of test and positivity rate, and this was as of the information from February through yesterday, through February 26th. And you see UK 7,132 tests, Italy 9,462 tests, and we get down to the United States, 445 tests. Now, why is that? Why so few tests being conducted in the United States? I know we have had way more people come in from overseas air flights and things than 446 people since this thing started. So let's look at the criteria that the CDC uses to see who even gets tested. You know, the CDC is only testing those people who present the symptoms to a medical facility. They have the symptoms for the COVID-19, and they have either been to China within the last 14 days from the time they present their symptoms, or they have had close contact with an individual who had already positively tested for the COVID-19. So in other words, the number of people and the group of people they were testing or are testing here in the United States is such a limited group, such a narrow scope of people. In reality, we have no idea how many people are currently infected with the COVID virus, and we have no idea who and where they are at this point. And it doesn't take a whole lot of them to be an ignition point for an epidemic in this country. All it takes is one. Just like terrorism, we have to be right all the time. We have to catch plots, terrorist plots, before they happen to keep them from happening. The terrorists only have to be right once, where we don't catch it. Same thing is true here. If we don't catch every case and nip it in the bud and investigate and trace down the contacts that person has made, this thing will escape from the box. And I'm here to tell you right now that mathematically speaking and logically speaking, this thing is out of the box here in the United States. And it may not happen as rapidly because of some of the measures that we are taking, but it will happen that the number of people affected as it represents our population is going to mirror what's going on around the rest of the world. It just may not happen as quickly, but it will happen because once it's out of the box and you can't control the contact of those people who have it, more and more and more people get it. So I say it is just a matter of time before we end up with massive quarantines and lockdowns here in the United States. Because let's face it, lockdown is the only reason that they were able to put the brakes on and slow it down over in China. And that took a long time to do, with tens and tens of thousands of people being affected before even the lockdowns slowed it down. Now, that takes me to the next part of my video. Oh, by the way, let me mention the sources that the Worldometer uses. There's about 27 sources they use. The top three are the World Health Organization, the US CDC, and the National Health Center over in China. And they, like I say, about 23 other sources, 24 other sources, but those are the main three they get. Now let's look at the United States for a second here. Now, if you accept my premise that it's out of the box, and sooner or later, at some speed of progression, what's happened in the rest of the world as far as the spread of this virus goes, is going to happen here in the United States. And when it does, the only thing that's going to slow it down enough that it will not totally overwhelm our medical facilities here is lockdowns, where people are stay at home, shelter in place, being isolated by decree from the government. And that means they won't go to work. Now, for those people that can't work from home on the computers and stuff, that means mostly they're going to lose their paychecks, because if you don't work, you don't get paid most places around this country. Now, if they lose their paychecks for any prolonged period of time, like there's people in China, have been over 2 months since they've been allowed to go to work. And if that happens here in the United States and extends out to month after month, remember, lockdown is the only means of effective control against the spread once it's been out of the box. And so no telling how long the lockdown will last. But the longer it goes on, the longer people go without paychecks, the more likely it is that they will end up on the wrong side of their mortgages. So what I'm proposing is that each of the 50 states, because they're the ones in control of the financial institutions within their states and how they do business, each of the 50 states passes a piece of emergency legislation that very simply keeps mortgage companies from, number one, accruing interest on mortgage loans, and number two, requiring payments on mortgage loans for individuals' primary residences during any government lockdown or quarantine that would keep them from going to work, anytime that would be a government decree that kept them from going to work, they would be protected from the time the government made the announcement to the 30 days after the decree was lifted. During that period, mortgage companies would not collect interest or collect payments on mortgages of people's primary residences. It just seems like something that it makes sense to do. If it doesn't happen, if we don't go into prolonged lockdown, nobody's really lost anything. But if we go into lockdown without this protection, it could cause and create a real mess in a whole lot of people's lives. So notify your representatives, your state representative and your state senator in most states. In Nebraska, notify your representative. Ask them to draft and pass an emergency legislation that would protect people during the situation I described. Now, they may say, the representatives may give you an excuse and say, oh, we can't do that. The time for submitting bills is over. Or we're not in session or something like this. Well, let me tell you something. States pass emergency laws all the time. They can spin the rule about filing bills and go ahead and pass the bill. So remember, ask your representatives if they give you that excuse to suspend the rules and pass it anyway. States pass emergency legislation all the time. Okay, this video has been long enough. Pass it on to your friends. Remember, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So once you contact your representative, keep calling them every other day or so. If they haven't taken action on it yet, remind them you sure would like them to. Ask your friends to do the same thing. If enough people call our representatives, sooner or later they'll get the message that the people want this done. And it might possibly happen. I know that if nobody tries, it won't happen. Have a great day.